What's up, everyone? It's me, Nathan Air 626, and today I'll be reading you 10 creepypastas that I found on spinpasta.fandom.com. Hope you guys enjoy, and I will be giving my opinion after each one, so enjoy. I just want to start off by saying, if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There just isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course. Most internships aren't. But it did have some perks beyond education. To adults, it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would go crazy over it. Since I work directly with the editors and animators, I got to view the new episodes days before they aired. I'll get right to it without giving too many unnecessary details. They had very recently made the SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity. So it took them longer to start the season. But the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the Series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months. Me and two other interns were in the editing room along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received the copy that was supposed to be Fear of a Krabby Patty and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that it isn't final yet, animators often put up a mock title card, sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, oftentimes lewd title cards, such as "How Sex Doesn't Work." Instead of Rockabye by Valve, when SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop, nothing particularly funny, but work-related chuckles. So we saw the title card, Squidward's Suicide. We didn't think it was more than a morbid joke. One of the interns did do a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music plays as normal. The story began with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear the SpongeBob laughing outside, and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down as he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up, and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is when things begin to seem off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, sound is synced up with the animation, so yes, that's not common. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened. There is a slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo him. Not normal cartoon booing that is common in the show, but you could very clearly hear Malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd with SpongeBob in the center frame, and he too is booing, very much unlike him. That isn't the oddest thing, though. What is odd is everyone had hyper-realistic eyes, very detailed. Clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but something a bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red. Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused. But since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children yet. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out of his porthole window is of a night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part is at this point there is no sound. Literally no sound. Not even after the feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, though their status showed them working perfectly. He just sat there, blinking in the silence for about 30 seconds. Then he started to sob softly. He put his tentacles over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute more. All the while, a sound in the background very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through a forest. The screen slowly begins to zoom in on his face. By slow, I mean it's only noticeable if you look at shots 10 seconds apart, side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if it twists in on itself, for a split second, then go back to normal. The wind through the trees sound gets louder and more severe, as if a storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part is the sound. and Squidward's sobbing sounded real, as if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes. The sound was coming through from the other side. As good a sound as the studio likes to have, they don't purchase the equipment that would be good enough to produce sound of that quality. Below the sound of the wind sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came from odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, so you had a hard time pinning it. We watched the show twice, so pardon me if things sound too specific. I've had a time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animator paused and rewound the frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. The face was mangled and bloodied. One eye dangling over his upturned face popped. He's naked down to his underwear. His stomach crudely cut open and his entrails laying beside him. He was laying on some pavement that was probably a road. The most upsetting part was there was a shadow of the photographer. There was no crime tape, no evidence tags or markers, and the angle was completely off for a shot dying to be evidence. It would seem the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were, of course, mortified, but pressed on, hoping that it was just a sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing louder than before, and half-body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in a hyper-realistic style, looking as if you get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded now as if it were of a gale blowing through the forest. There was even snapping sounds of branches, the laughing and a deep baritone lasting at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back. We all were, but he knew he had to. This time, the photo was that of what appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, her barrettes in the pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was two popped out and popped, naked except for underpants. Her entrails were piled on top of her, above another crude cut along her back. Again, the body was on the street, and the photographer's shadow was visible, very similar in size and shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit, and one intern, the only female in the room, ran out. The show resumed. About 5 seconds after the second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound, like it was when the scene started. He put his tentacles down, and his eyes were now done in hyper-realism, like the others were in the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen, as if watching the viewer. After 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud. Most fear, including all of his sobbing, was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep voice laughing. And this time, the still photo lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th and backed up. This time, the photo was of a boy, about the same age, but this time the scene was different. The entrails were being pulled out from a stomach wound by a large hand. This right eye popped and dangling, blood trickling down it. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different, but we couldn't tell what. He went on to the next, same thing. He went back to the first and played them quicker, and I lost it. I vomited on the floor the animating and sound editors gasping at the screen. The 5 frames were not as if they were 5 different photos. They played out as if they were 5 frames from a video. We saw the hand slowly lift out the guts. We saw the kid's eyes focus on it. We even saw 2 frames of the kid beginning to blink. The lead editor told us to stop. He had to call in the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within about 15 minutes. He was confused as to why he was called down there, so the editor just continued the episode. Once a few frames were shown, all screaming, all sound again just stopped. Squidward was staring at the viewer, full frame and face, for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out, and that deep voice said, "Do it." And we see in Squidward's hands a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun to his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatters the wall behind him and his bed. He flies back with the force. The last 5 seconds of the episode show his body on the bed, on his one side, one eye dangling off of what is left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it. Then the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg was obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the heck was going on. Most people left the room at this point, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served the imprint of entirety of it in my mind. It caused me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we could think of was the file was edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called in to analyze what happened when it happened. The analysis of the file did show it was edited by a new material. However, the timestamp of it was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware as well as glitches, as if the timestamp may have glitched and showed the wrong time. But everything checked out fine. We didn't know what happened, and to this day, nobody does. There was an investigation due to the natures of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child scene was identified, and no clues were gathered from the data involved, nor physical clues on the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomena before, but now I have something. But now that I have something happen, I can't prove anything about it beyond anecdotal evidence. I think twice about things now. Alright guys, I thought that this is my opinion on Squidward's suicide. I thought that this one was pretty good. The people who wrote this one did a pretty good job, and was a bit graphic, but I still liked it, and it was more like, it was much harder to read because there was a bunch of things that I didn't know how to say, like the one at the end, like whatever it was. I didn't know how to say it, so I just tried to say it the best I could. And alright guys, let's head on to the next one. I've always loved Cartoon Network. When I was growing up, it was my favorite channel to watch. Even today, it has some good shows, like Adventure Time and Regular Show. One of the newest shows on the network, The Amazing World of Gumball, is a cute and mildly entertaining show. Not really my cup of tea, but it's a little mature, but my little brother seems to like it a lot. One day I was watching Adult Swim when I realized that I've been up so late that I haven't even kept track of the time. It was already 4 a.m. I don't recall ever watching it this late, so I stayed awake to see what happened when it ended. A little bumper showed up at the bottom of the screen during a commercial break. It said that a special episode of The Amazing World of Gumball was about to come on. I was a little confused about an episode of a very popular new show coming on this early, but I was bored and decided I'd watch it, thinking it might come on later in the day so I could spoil it for my brother. Sort of mean, I know. The flashy, energetic intro theme played, although it was played a little differently than I recall. The music was a little different, and the show's logo wasn't animated. Its colors were done rather sloppily as well, almost like something a little kid would do on a doodle board or a glow board. I ignored it, assuming that it was done for I'm assuming that it was done just for this special episode. The title of the episode was The Grieving. Sort of a sad title, but I didn't really pay too much attention. It began with Gumball, the show's 12-year-old protagonist, standing alone facing a corner of this dimly lit classroom. He looked absolutely miserable, a far cry from the cheerful demeanor he usually had. There was no one else in the room, not even his best friend and adopted brother Darwin the goldfish, and the windows in the room clearly showed the night sky outside. I was really starting to get confused. Why would he be at the school at night, and why was he standing in the corner all sad and alone? After what seemed like a minute of Gumball standing somberly in the corner, the scene suddenly changed. We were in Gumball's house. Once again, the scene is silent and a little disquieting. Richard, the Gumball's enormous rabbit father, walks in from the kitchen. He looked even more miserable than Gumball had in the previous scene. Richard wasn't wearing his usual attire. He was dressed in this fancy black suit, a little uncharacteristic of him, since he's usually a slob. He sighs and slumps down on the sofa and starts sobbing intensely, sounding like someone who had just lost something important. I was starting to get a little creeped out. Where was the silly, fun cartoon that I usually look forward to watching with my younger brother? This was something completely different. I began to think that this might have been something the creators did in this experiment or something, a test of the animation or sound, maybe? Though it couldn't have been, aside from the opening theme, which was so different than from the final shows. The episode was much quieter than it usually was, only subtle sounds and very little music, and the animation was not anything to write home about either. It was done a bit like an amateur flash on Newgrounds. The character designs were somewhat sloppy and rushed-looking, and the real-life backgrounds used for the show looked different. As confused and somewhat frightened I was, for some reason I kept watching it. Poor Richard was still sobbing on the couch as the front door opened, suddenly making me jump a bit at such a loud noise. And Gumball's mother, Nicole, a blue cat like him, stepped in. Like Richard, she wasn't wearing her usual attire. For some reason, she was in this black dress and was wearing a pretty black hat to match. Nicole sat down on the couch to comfort her husband, although she was looking a bit sad in herself. By this point, Richard's crying had begun to get more pained and miserable sounding. This wasn't the normal cartoon crying on the show. This was realistic and almost depressing crying. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the sad scene at their home had ended. As it shifted back to the school, we weren't in Gumball's classroom this time. We were in Principal Brown's office. Nicole and Richard were there, in their usual clothes, looking more normal and happy than they did before, but kind of still worried. Principal Brown, however, looked extremely sad. He quietly and somberly informed them that their children, Anais and Darwin, were not present after lunch earlier that day and hadn't been seen at all the rest of the day. Nicole was intensely furious at him. She began to spouting various words and calls at him that I don't think would have made it on a mature, more program like regular show. I was like laughing at this because it seems so funny, sort of funny for Nicole to flip out in this manner and start swearing like a sailor in a G-rated cartoon. But my outlook soon changed when Principal Brown told her something after she had finally quieted down. Her eyes began to tear up as he informed them that they were eventually found, but they had not been found alive. He then went into graphic and nearly nauseating detail describing how their bodies were found, their parents sitting in utter shock. I could hardly believe what was happening. How could such a cheery and fun kids show be taking such a dark and twisted turn? I was considering turning the television off, but I was too scared to be left in the dark by now, nearly frozen by fear and disturbed intensely at the terrible things that he was saying. Another flashback. The scene was earlier that day, and the animation in the scene was even worse than earlier. I don't remember it very clearly, but I think he began his recollection by saying that the school had called the police department when they first turned up missing, believing the kids had simply ran off and decided to skip school or something. They said it was very uncharacteristic of both Darwin and Anais to go skipping school like delinquents. Darwin was a little naive and a bit ditzy, but he was a good kid and wouldn't have even dreamed about doing something like that. And Anais was even less likely to run away. She was a straight-A student, despite being only 4, which also troubled the police, saying that a defenseless 4-year-old little girl was missing, as well as an older boy. The school had been thoroughly checked. the police started to search the heavily wooded area outside the school. It took a little time for the police to discover the horrifying fate of Anais. In a small clearing outside the school, Anais' head was found in a small box. You would have expected something like that to be shown in the show's cutesy art style, but it was nothing like that at all. Realistic blood covered the box inside out, while Anais' head was done in the normal style, but was drenched in the blood and some other fluids, not all of them hers apparently. There was a note in the box, seemingly written in her blood, and it was never stated during the episode what exactly was written on the note, but it apparently led to the rest of her remains and Darwin's heavily mutilated corpse being found. What I remember most about the scene is how out of place it seemed. All the blood and gore from Darwin and Anais slaughtered and dismembered was done in this very realistic and disturbing way. It looks like the scene had been taken from a crime scene photograph done by a professional, not something from a cartoon. The way the scene was animated was different from most of the show as well. You may know that the characters from the series are done in a vastly differing animation style, from flash animation to CGI, and I think there's even a character done by someone putting their chin upside down to make a face. This particular scene wasn't like anything I'd ever seen on the show before. Every little detail on Darwin's face was clearly illustrated. He kind of looked like a zombie. His face was very pale, and his eyes had been gouged out by someone. Anais fared no better. Or what was left of her, anyway. She was naked, and her stomach had been slit open. Her intestines were strewn on the trees and bushes inside the wood, done once again in this very morbid and realistic style. I was feeling very ill by the time this incredibly disturbing flashback came to an end. So I quickly ran to the bathroom to vomit. I was feeling better after the upchucking, so I realized that I had good timing, and I had ran to the bathroom during a commercial. Then I noticed that the show had been running twice as long. It usually ran for 11 minutes, but the episode was running for about 30. But by then I was wondering if there was any information on the grieving on IMDb or something. So while the commercials were still playing, I looked up some information about this episode on Google. Nothing came up. No information remotely similar to the plot or the name existed anywhere. Now incredibly scared, wondering if anyone else was watching, I quickly dialed my brother Larry and asked him to turn on Cartoon Network and see if he was seeing the same stuff that I was. He was pretty mad at me that I woke him up at this hour, but he's a nice guy and told me he would see for me. I thanked him and stayed on the line as the show came back from a commercial break. The scene had thankfully panned away from the horrific sight of the children mutilated and was back in principal's office. I asked Larry if he saw some cartoon animals talking or crying, since that's what they were doing on my TV. To my surprise, he said he saw nothing like that. Instead, it was a rerun of an old Looney Tunes short. In utter shock, I dropped the phone and ran over to the TV to turn it off. And as hard as I pressed the buttons, it would not shut off at all. I tried every single button, and none of them did a thing. I tried unplugging the whole thing as well, but nothing worked. The TV stayed on no matter what I did. Larry had hung up, assuming that I was playing a joke or something, I guess. And I was alone once again. My door was locked from the outside somehow, and the door to my bathroom was now locked. As well, it seemed that I had no choice but to call the police, since my other family members were gone that night. It was the reason I could stay up so late to watching Adult Swim in the first place. When I hurriedly dialed the number, I accidentally dropped my cell phone in the cup of Pepsi. I was very scared, and I had no choice but to finish the episode. I turned on all the lights in my room and got under the covers like my little brother does when I make him watch scary movies with me. I had apparently missed a little bit, but Gumball's parents were still talking to Principal Brown. So not that much. Nicole was asking me if Gumball was alright. Apparently, since she had remembered him when Principal Brown told her about what happened to Anais and Darwin. He looked slightly confused and shocked for a moment, and explained to her that he thought Gumball was out sick today, and he had spent the day at home by himself with the stomach bug. Nicole screamed and wailed, while Richard quietly told him, in an out-of-character voice, that they thought a Gumball got in the bus this morning, but it didn't seem that way. The police were called once again to search the building in the small forest outside of Elmore Junior High. They had found him in Miss Simeon's classroom, hanging by a noose, with blood-covered knife behind him and covering his clothing. The episode ended with a shot of Gumball's dead body hanging there in the corner, fading to black. The credits rolled silently, not like the usual way Cartoon Network annoyingly airs a promo that swishes half the screen. The credits rolled unusually slow, and they weren't that fun to watch either. A little creepy, just plain white text rolling on a black background. I only recognized Ben Bocquelet's name, since he was the creator of the show. The rest were people I had never heard of. The copyright notice at the end said at Cartoon Network Studios 2001, which is incredibly odd seeing how the show was new for 2011. After all that was over, the screen went to static for a split second, during which some incredibly and creepy, shocking video clips were shown between static intervals. I can still remember them all very clearly. The first was a picture of a person in the Plague Doctor outfit. You know, the ones with the bird-style face, those weird bird-style faces. Those always scared me for some reason, and the way that person was filmed was just as bad. A red light, something that freaks me out incredibly too, was shown over the clip. The next seemed to be like a video being played very quickly, over and over, of a kitten's face being squished by a woman wearing high heels, which is strange because a so-called friend of mine sent me a picture yesterday of a cat being stepped on and killed, similar to the kitten in the video. The last one was the one that disturbed me the most. It made me want to cry and vomit my guts out. It was my little brother, or at least a small child who looked very similar to him, being shot in the face by a person who looked like my father. You could clearly see the child's brains and blood splatter all over the wall. I began to sob uncontrollably after that traumatizing clip, so much so that I passed out. When I woke up, my door was unlocked. My television was turned off. I went to call the police on the home phone in my kitchen and reported that I had seen some very disturbing things on TV and that my doors had been locked. When they arrived, they could not find anything like what I remembered from earlier this morning. I told my brother about the episode, and he fainted. My internet history was even cleared. They were angry at me and assumed that I had just had a bad nightmare, which I was sure I hadn't. Good thing I recorded the episode. The officers were shocked when I showed them. One of the officers felt bad for me and took me out to a small diner so I could recollect my thoughts. At the diner, I remembered that my family was out visiting my aunt. They were supposed to be back by noon or so. It was already 11, so the officer and I drove back, only to find a whole squad of police cars and even some government agents at my house. They explained to me that my little brother was missing and my mother and father were major suspects. I was freaking out and tried to tell them about the disturbing clip of the boy who looked like my brother being shot in the head, but they would never listen. I stated my other brother, Larry, who wouldn't believe me either, still insisting that all he saw was an old Looney Tunes cartoon. Nothing at all creepy or weird. The cops eventually told me that they would contact Turner Broadcasting and tell them about the incident. A representative of Turner Broadcasting came to my cousin's house to talk to me in private about what I'd seen and experienced that night. He was very kind, but it all seemed like a little like something sort of out of front. After I could tell him all I remembered, he agreed to play back that day's programming from when the incident with the disturbing Gumball episode had occurred. To my shock, all that was airing at the time was an old Looney Tunes short. Nothing more, nothing less. I hysterically sobbed and moaned at what I experienced and seen that was completely real. But no one ever listened. Eventually, I discovered that Ben Bocquelet had a Twitter account, so I sent a message about the episode, and this is what the reply I got. One thing, how in the heck could you find that? I never, ever, ever thought I would think about that old shame again. Don't tell anyone this, Sarah. But the amazing world of Gumball goes back further than you know. I used to have a whirling, boring job as a teen, and I sketched little drawings of the Watersons and friends. The episode you saw was never supposed to be seen by anyone but me and a few friends of mine. It was a very, very awful thing to do, but we made the episode as a joke. A guy from my old job who everyone hated had lost a child to a crazy serial killer who was apparently still out there somewhere. Anyway, we made it so we could make fun of how he came into work usually, crying like a fool, which is why you saw Mr. and Mrs. Watterson cry so much in the episode. I know, I'm deeply sorry for what I did, which is why I tried to bury that stupid thing years ago. Literally, I went out into the countryside with my mates and dug a hole and buried it. What I don't get, though, is how you describe the blood and guts and stuff. We didn't have any scene with Darwin and Anani's bodies being found. All that happens in the episode is the parents are being informed of the kids being found dead and them crying like crazy. We didn't draw anything like that in the episode, like that at all. We're not that sick. Now, this is my theory. The lunatic who killed the man's child found the tape we buried, watched it, and heavily edited it. Then he hijacked the local TV station near... You don't need to know where I live. Somehow. And got the episode to air on your local Cartoon Network station. Now, why your brother couldn't see it, I have no idea. But it seems like you're the only one who saw it. I have no idea either. Sorry, but I just don't know. Now for the explanation you have been waiting for. The clips at the end, I don't know. I don't. I'm deeply sorry from the bottom of my heart, but I don't know why those clips were aired. I just don't. I'm sorry. I really am. Me and my mates are just the ones who made these scenes with the Richard and Nicole crying. That's it. I'm so sorry, sir. I'm deeply sorry. Best wishes, Ben Boquilla, and everyone involved with the grieving. Alright, guys. That one was a pretty good one to read. My opinion, I thought it was a pretty good creepypasta. I didn't think it was all that bad. It just a little bit weird and creepy. Sorry if it sounds like I'm sick right now. It's been 2 days since I recorded that Squidward suicide, and I'm feeling kind of like my runny nose and everything, so let's move on to the next one. Do you remember those old Mickey Do any of you remember those old Mickey cartoons from the 1930s? The ones that were just put out on DVD a few years ago? Well, I hear there was one that was unreleased and the most avid classic Disney fans. According to sources, it's nothing special. It's just a continuous loop like Flintstones of Mickey walking past 6 buildings that goes on for 2 or 3 minutes before fading out. Unlike the cutesy tunes put in through, the song on this cartoon was not a song at all. Just a constant banging on the piano for a minute and a half before going to white noise for the remainder of the film. It wasn't just the jolly old Mickey we've come to love either. Mickey wasn't dancing, not even smiling, just kind of walking as if you or I were walking, with a normal facial expression, but for some reason his head titled side to side. As he kept this dismissal look. Up until a year or two ago, everyone believed that after it cut to black and that was it. When Leonard Maltin was reviewing the cartoon to be put in the complete series, he decided it would be too junk to be on DVD, but wanted a digital copy due to the fact that it was a creation of Walt. When he had a DigiZ version up on his computer to look at the file, he noticed something. The cartoon was actually 9 minutes and 4 seconds long. This is what my source emailed to me in full. He is a personal assistant of one of higher executives of Disney, an acquaintance of Mr. Maltin himself. After it cut to black, it stayed like that until the 6th minute before going back to Mickey into walking. The sound was different. It was a murmur. It wasn't a language, but more like a gurgled cry. As the noise got more indistinguishable and loud over the next minute, the picture began to get weird. The sidewalk started to go in directions that seemed impossible based on the physics of Mickey's walking, and the dismissive face of the mouse was slowly curling into a smirk. On the 7th minute, the murmur turned into a blood-curdling scream, the kind of scream painful to hear. And the picture was getting more obscure. Colors were happening that shouldn't have been possible at the time. Mickey's face began to fall apart. His eyes rolled on the bottom of his chin like 2 marbles in a fishbowl, and his curled smile was pointing upward towards the left side of his face. Upward on the left side of his face. The buildings began rubble floating in mid-air, and the sidewalk was completely impossibly navigating in the warped buildings. As few seeming inconceivable with what we were, as humans know about direction. Mr. Maltin got disturbed and left the room, sending an email to finish the video and take notes on everything happening up until the last second. Afterward, immediately threw the disc of the cartoon into the vault. This distorted screaming lasted until 8 minutes and a few seconds in, and then it abruptly cuts to Mickey's face at the credits of the end of the video with what sounded like a broken music box playing in the background. This happened for about 30 seconds, and whatever was in that remaining 30 seconds, I haven't been able to get a sliver of information about. From a security guard working under me who was making rounds outside of that room, I was told that after the last frame, the employee stumbled out of the room with pale skin saying real suffering is not known. 7 times before speedily taking the guard's pistol and offing himself on the spot. The thing I could get out of Leonard Maltin was that the last frame was a piece of Russian text that roughly said, "The sights of hell bring its viewers back in." As far as I know, no one else has seen it, but there is dozens of attempts at trying to get the file on rapid share by employees inside of the studios, all of whom have promptly terminated of their jobs. Whether it got online or not is up for debate. But if rumors serve me right, it's online somewhere under suicidemouse.avi. If you ever find the copy of the film, I want you to never view it and contact me by phone immediately, regardless of the time when a Disney death is covered up as well as this. It means that this has to be something huge. Get back at me. TR. I have yet to find this copy, but it is still out there. I know it. Update, here's the original video. It may be considered a screamer. Alright guys, that one was a bit shorter. I recorded this one the same day on the graving. I will put the link of the 2 videos that I found in the description. And again, this one was much shorter than I expected, because I expected it to be at least 10 minutes to narrate, but it only ended up being a minute or 2. So, like I said, I'll put the 2 video links that I found for a quote-unquote official video in the description below. And I will also try to find, of course, fake footage of the grieving and everything. So, hope you guys enjoyed, and be back tomorrow for more creepypastas.